Please welcome the CEO of the Churchill Club, Karen Tucker.
Thank you so kindly. Thank you so very much. What a wonderful group of people, a packed, sold-out house tonight. We're all here to listen to John Chambers and Mel Selkirk. We're very privileged to have them with us. Thank you. And we're excited to share the evening ahead with you. But first, as always, we have a few comments and some thank yous to do. You may know that our passion at Churchill Club is to educate, inspire, and support people who wish to drive forward innovation, economic growth, and societal benefit. And we view it as part of our work as one of the top thought leadership forums in the world to try to advance collective understanding and also to remind people of leadership and the human aspects that are very important. And thinking about the things that are important to us tonight, I don't think there's anybody who embodies these values and intentions more out in the world than John Chambers. So tonight we hope to surface new insights and inspiration to help us create and meet the future together. We also would like to thank our longtime partner and sponsor, Cisco, especially Tay Yu. You will be gifted with a book tonight, courtesy of Cisco, so that's very wonderful. And to our host and valued partner, Citrix Systems, the team here worked very hard to get this newly renovated space together for us tonight. So special shout out to Don Fox and Teresa Henley. Thank you so very much. And now it is my pleasure to bring to the stage someone we admire and appreciate greatly. He is Executive Vice President and Chief Product Officer here at Citrix. Please welcome PJ Hawk.
Thank you, Karen. Well, thank you, Karen. It's always a pleasure to welcome the distinguished Churchill Club back to the Templeton Auditorium, the recently renovated Templeton Auditorium here at Citrix. Tonight we have the privilege to present John Chambers in conversation with Mel Selkirk. Mr. Chambers is a legend who certainly needs no introduction, yet it's always astounding to think back on his incredible achievements. During his 25-plus years at Cisco as CEO, chairman, and executive chairman, he helped grow the company from $70 million when he joined to $1.2 billion when he became CEO in '95, and to $47 billion and 70,000 employees when he stepped down as CEO in 2015. John remained at Cisco as executive chairman until late 2017 and continued to have an impact in many ways. Today, he's founder and CEO of JC2 Ventures, focused on helping startups build and scale. We're here to celebrate the debut of John's brand new book, his first, entitled Connecting the Dots, Lessons for Leadership in a Startup World. This important book details his perspectives on leadership, provides a playbook for startups, and highlights tactics for reinvention. Here to guide the conversation with John is Mel Selkirk, VP of Brand Marketing and Corporate Communications at LinkedIn. Mel previously worked for John as Chief Communications Officer at Cisco. In fact, her support for John's transition from CEO to chairman became a Harvard Business School case study. Her friendship with John is a perfect example of one lesson from his book, Build Relationships for Life. Before we bring them up to stage, let's watch a short video introducing the book. Please join me, everybody, in welcoming John Chambers and Mel Selkirk to stage. Thank you.
PJ, thank you.
Thank you, John.
It's a pleasure. Mel, it's fun to do this again. It's been a couple years.
It's been a while.
We haven't changed at all.
We look better, I think.
Now you see why she's so good at brand management, marketing, communications, and
All right. I get to start it off. So
I'm trying to soften her up before she asks the tough questions.
I want to start by thanking Karen and the Churchill team for putting this event together and thanking the Citrix. We're so grateful to be able to christen this new gorgeous space. So thank you for hosting us. And I mostly want to thank whoever provided the full meal, because that's not usually how it works with John. Those of you in the room who've worked with John know that it usually goes something like this. You show up to his house on a Sunday at 10 a.m. to dive into a meaty project. You immediately dive in, and 6 hours later, you're starving. And you mention something to John. He hands you a couple Diet Cokes and a handful of crickets, and he's ready to go. And he's good for another 8 hours. And so the fact that we actually ate a full meal is quite good fortune. So in all seriousness, John's passion and energy are obviously legendary. And I loved Jamie Dimon talked about that passion is what has led John to set a standard of innovation and leadership for decades. And so those of you that know John know him as a visionary, you know him as a world-renowned CEO, you know him as a confidant and advisor, but he's also one of the most decent, compassionate, and good humans you will ever know. And so I think all of us know John leads with integrity and relationships first. And I think that's why he's one of the most beloved CEOs in the Valley and in the industry and in the world. So I'm very fortunate to get to spend the next hour with all of you, getting to dig a little bit into what John's been up to, what we'll learn in the book. And so let's get started.
All right.
All right. Last time you and I were on stage was the day that you announced you were moving out of the CEO role at Cisco. When did you know it was the right time to leave Cisco?
I knew almost 10 years before I left that the transition needed to occur in the next decade, and that it needed to be a smooth transition, because as all of you know, most of the high-tech transitions where somebody was the founder or close to being the founder and then the company grew well went terribly wrong. And so I wanted to make sure that when I turned my family over to the next generation of leadership, it was smooth. And the window presented itself, and about when I said to the board 3 to 4 more years, and I'd always said 4 to 5, that I really meant 3 to 4. And it was 3 years almost to the day. But also I was ready for my next chapter of my life. And Mel, we've teased about it. I've never ever been to a graduation party, a going away party, other than the 40,000 people at the 49ers Stadium. And that was an exception, a fun one. And it was deeply honored because of the people here. But I've always been on to my next chapter, whether it was high school graduation, college, law school, MBA, going away parties, companies, etc. And so I was ready for the next chapter in my life where I can hopefully make a difference one more major time.
And so now you've gone from being the CEO of a $50 billion a year company with 70,000 employees to now running a 3-person, including yourself, company. What's the biggest adjustment?
Well, first of all, I always knew how much the Cisco people in this room made a difference in my ability to get things done, but I really know it now. And Shannon and my son John, they're amazing. Part of the difference, though, is that I always am comfortable getting outside my comfort zone. And I like occasionally need a nudge, but it is so much fun just doing what you want in life. And every day's a new journey. And for those of you who have kids or grandkids, you know where I'm going. When all of a sudden you get to work with 16 startups that you're very close to and you love tremendously, and you get to watch their successes and their challenges, but you also work with thousands of other startups around the world, it's like a kid in the candy store. I've never had more fun or made more difference, and I've never had more fun with Elaine. We've had more vacations together in the last year than we had in several years combined, and she's keeping me, at least I think you are. She's looking over her shoulder to see yes or no. But I'm having the time of my life, and I hope it shows. And I think it's what each of us needs to do. When you're ready for your next chapter, don't finish your current chapter and then say, what do I do next? Think about what you want to do, experiment a little bit with it, and then to have the courage to reinvent yourself and go for it. And you might get knocked on your backside. If you do, get back up and go again.
And you've gotten really good emojis in your texts, lots of emojis.
Yes.
So your career's had a lot of incredible highlights and some really painful challenges. As you look back, what stands out as the biggest highlight, and on the opposite, the most scarring challenge?
It's hard to hold it to just one in each category, so with your permission, I might mention two. The highlight is what we did together at Cisco. From 10,000 millionaires to changing the world, the way it works, lives, learns, and plays. And what was very important to me, even though I didn't understand it at first at Cisco, that now I teach all my startups the culture we built. And while we weren't perfect, we were a family, and nobody beat us. I mean, nobody. And we love to compete. We competed like we'd expect people to compete with us. But to be able to do that as a company and to change the world was a tremendous honor on it. So it's the people and the results we got. In terms of the downsides, you know, when you have a family and you hit very tough times. My parents are both doctors, and as we've discussed before with some of you all, they taught me deal with the world the way it is, not the way you wish it was. Don't get the symptoms confused with the real issues, and then deal with the real issues quickly, aggressively, etc. So clearly 2001, after everything had gone so well, almost too well for a decade, and then going into that slowdown and having to do something I never thought I'd have to do again in life, which is lay people off. And it's the ownership of the CEO. And you can rationalize it all you want. If we weren't going 100 miles an hour for a decade, we would have been the Wellfleets and the Cabletrons and the IBMs and others. But we took the risk, and I got surprised in 2001 because I got too close to my data and didn't watch some of the bigger pictures with customers as much. So that was very painful, even though I think we went through a class and made all our changes in 51 days and came out of it even stronger. That was clearly when you're sitting outside, and Lane would tell you, and you're looking up at the stars, and you go, you know, you don't want to feel sorry for yourself ever, but if there was a day, that would be the day to have felt that way. And I was more concerned about the people and the customers. But you learn more from your mistakes and missteps than you do your successes. And for all of you who are parents, you know what I'm saying on this. You're not concerned about your kid making a great grade or scoring a soccer goal. You're concerned about how do they handle their challenges along the way. So learning through that. The second time was equally as hard. It was in my home state giving a commencement address. And to come back was a big deal. 4 generations of our family educated at West Virginia University. And the media went after me, my hometown paper, about a shareholder lawsuit that they didn't understand, saying I was about to be indicted. And you can imagine being up in front of 28,000 people that brought you there because of your integrity, your commitment to the state. I'm not perfect, and let me be very upfront, I am not. But I try to do the right thing. And my mom was there, and it's the last trip she made with us. She had Alzheimer's at that time. And my dad knocked on my door that morning and said, John, we've got a problem. And he showed me the paper, and boy, your stomach just drops out. First, how can somebody you care about do this to you? And secondly, I'm about to go on stage. How do I deal with it? And he said, you've got to deal with the world the way it is. I said, I got it. How much time do I have? And he said, you got 20 minutes. And so I canned the speech the way it was, opened it a different way, and driven it through. It's both of those I wish I could have avoided. Mm-hmm. The second, as much for my family as for me, because Lane was there and the kids were there and everybody else. The first one because it affected so many people. But you will find that you never have a great company until you have a near-death experience, as Jack Welch taught me. It'll be fun watching the companies here in the Valley who have never been knocked down, that are now starting to get knocked down. How will they come through that as well?
So if you had to boil it down to one thing, what would you say is your superpower, your biggest strength that's proven your success factor in your career?
I think it's the ability to get market transitions right and to build great teams who can really move on those market transitions. That's why we were successful.
Good one. What do you want to be remembered for?
As a great grandfather, as a great father, as a great husband, somebody who really makes a difference. So family first, and that includes my Cisco family as well. And then I'd like to have an influence on changing the world twice. I think we did it, Mel, and you were a huge part of that, along with many people in this room. Once about the internet changing your lives and changing the way you work, live, learn, and live and learn. And even my marketing team didn't like that, but we did. And then maybe now doing it with startups. and to re-get this country going again in innovation and startup, which we are no longer leading and we're in trouble on, in job creation. So to do that twice, to have an influence on it, and to do it across the whole country, just like we did the internet around the world, I mean, that is a rush. And it's classic, an unbelievable stretch goal, which people say can't be done, getting people around you in an ecosystem, we can do it, and then having the courage to go for it and realize if you're not successful, you're going to get criticized, but that's part of leadership.
Yep. And you touched on family. I have an incredible partner with
Yes, you
whom
do,
I
and Joel?
could not do what I do.
Although your mother wouldn't give up any of the things that I didn't know about you prior to you
She's well trained. She's
earlier.
And I've had the good fortune of knowing Elaine.
Do you notice how quickly she moved me right off that topic to the next? She is good at this.
I've had the great fortune to know Elaine, who's been your partner for many decades. So tell
school
those
sweetheart.
who don't know Elaine about the role Elaine has played in your life and your career.
She's the best thing that ever happened to me. I would not be here without her. I'm a little bit more of a risk taker. She's a little bit more conservative, but our values are identical. And on rare occasions I get down, and I do occasionally, but not too often, she gets me right back up, gets me focused in direction. And she's courageous. I've watched her do everything from lead Lucille Pactor's chairperson for the foundation to a battle with cancer that she was so strong in, stronger than I would have ever been. And when you almost worry about losing somebody, you realize how much you love them. So tremendously grateful for her, and very honored, very lucky to have her in my life.
You are very lucky. Okay, so you started your career at IBM in the mid-'70s when a job with Big Blue was the holy grail. What would you do today if you were graduating?
You know, I thought I would get that question multiple times this last 2 weeks, talking about startups and everything. The quick answer is I would absolutely go into startup. But I think the decision has to be made if you have children going this way, et cetera. What I would do is I would go to a school that offered a combination of entrepreneurship, artificial intelligence, digitization, and speed, both with technology backgrounds and business background. That woman or that man who would have those degrees could write their ticket going forward. And so this is where I think we've got to fix education, but I think we've also got to make sure the schools that our kids are attending are giving them the skills they're going to redo it. So a startup with that background would be what I'd, if I did it over again, that's absolutely what I'd do.
Are you seeing those schools get it?
They're starting to, but actually it's surprising. Some schools around the world are moving faster than we are here in this country. Definitely in K through 12. I think we all realize our education system is broken here. Teachers are good people, but we're teaching people often some of the textbooks I used many years ago. We've got to reinvent the education. I think this is where, and Tayu knows this, where if people are given a chance with a good curriculum, the scores on our network academies are identical around the world: men, women, locations, economic status, et cetera. And I'm worried we're going to leave behind our nation if at the same time we move to hopefully a more innovative and a more startup nation, if we don't give our young people and retrain people the chances for skills for the future. I think the implications are pretty sad.
All right, we're going to move on. So I hear you wrote a book.
Yes.
So I have to admit, when you first told me you were writing a book,
I'm worried what's next. I mean, when Mel asked me this question, my hands start to sweat a little bit. And
well, I have to admit, when you first told me you were writing a book, I was pretty surprised. You'd always said that you would either something you did when you were kind of out of the game or someone did when you were dead. So why?
They probably say more nice things about me on the second.
So what changed? Why write a book?
Back to getting market transitions and pattern recognition, I've gotten tremendously interested in startups. And as I got interested in startups, I realized it couldn't be just Silicon Valley, and being very candid, the safest place for me to invest is here in the Valley, where I can back channel everybody, work with almost all the VCs, et cetera. But realized that it needed to be across all 50 states. Otherwise, we're going to leave a lot of mid-America and the heartland America and the central part and southeast behind. But when I was in sessions with startups, didn't matter if it was New Delhi, didn't matter if it was Dubai, didn't matter if it was Tel Aviv, didn't matter if it was Paris, the questions were identical. Not monotonous, but identical. And it said that what startups struggle with, they struggle again and again on what is the role of the CEO? How do you know when it's time to change people? When do you take risk and when not? Why is culture important and where does it fit versus strategy? And I realized I was answering those same questions. Shannon tracks them. We got 280 questions, but the top 25 were every session. And I thought scaling-wise, this was a chance to really teach. And it was also a chance, perhaps, to make a difference in this country and other countries around the world.
Great.
So it was hard. I'm
gonna say.
dyslexic. It was really hard.
So that was my next question. Was it harder than you thought?
Much harder, took much longer. I thought we could do it in 3 months. Typical prior CEO with
Of course you did.
70,000 people.
With a couple crickets and some Diet Cokes, why not?
Exactly.
Right?
And, you know, I outlined a brilliant idea, told it to my co-author, and said, let me know when you're done. 14 months later, we were still sweating it out. And Diane was amazing, but it was much harder than I thought. And words really matter, and how do you tell the stories in a meaningful way? And the good news about my current position is I can really say what I believe. And I don't do anything I don't want to do. But doing that in a way that gives people something when they read. And if you, each of you would drop me an email after this and tell me what you thought of the book if you read it, what did you like, what not, it means a lot to me because I am constantly teaching. I want to build organizations. I'm actually going to measure my startups on do you grow employment, job creation in the startups at 40% plus per year out of all of them. That means you've got to grow revenues well above 50% for that to occur. So I have a different agenda in this next life, but it was even harder than I ever dreamed by a long way.
Do you have a favorite chapter in the book?
Yeah, I really do. I believe in dreams, and I've talked to many leaders around the world, some that you would know, some that you would have no idea about, just normal, everyday people like each of us in this room, myself included. But you've got to have the courage to dream. And if you're not way outside of your comfort zone, and if you don't have the courage to reach out and grab what's in front of you, and be bold with that. And then before you dream and be bold and you go for it, play out the chess game for what you want the outcome to be. Write the press release, which we've done many times. What is the most likely? What's the unfavorable? What's the positive? And then play it out with tremendous speeds. And even though that might sound logical and basic, almost no companies do that or stay with it. So it's that third chapter that I love the most, the ones that I probably personally enjoy the most that I think people forget. You form relationships for life, and you always say, how does the other person win, and driving it through. And while, again, not perfect, most every customer I've always interfaced to would trust me again. Most people I've worked with at Cisco or others, they'd work together again in a second. So it is that relationship trust and creating an environment where people win together.
Yeah. And I would say, just having read the book, playing out the chess game is not just for companies, it's for individuals.
Oh, there's a lot in there about leadership and going through challenges in life that applicable to individual contributors or the biggest companies or to startups, but it's at a fast-paced type of approach. And Mel's being very humble. She helped me get me over the finish line because I was struggling at the end. I said, Mel, I really need some help on this. What do you think? And you know what her response is for those of you know Mel. She said, this isn't bad, but needs some work. And then she was kind enough to help me through it in a big way. So thank you. And David, thank you.
All right, so connect the dots for us. Haha. How will you know if this book has been a success?
My goal has never been to sell a whole bunch of books or to have a one-time event. The goal is this a go-to book that individuals will go back to again and again, or startups go back to again and again, and the balance. I'll also connect the dots pretty quickly. And I'm usually very secure when I make moves, but this was so far outside my comfort zone, almost as bad as crickets and farming, and them being the next lobsters. But that one I kind of had fun with, that I wasn't sure. And then when I saw the people that I respect, Sonny say, hey, this has real meat. Saffron Katz said I couldn't put it down. I've had 2 compliments from her in 22 years on it. And I saw the young startups, each of the CEOs go through and take notes. And then when John Hennessy sent me an email I got last night, and prior President Stanford, and he said, John, this is terrific. Because I respect him so much in terms of his vision, his strategy, his teaching capability, and risk-taking. So I know that it has a high probability of now being successful. I had no idea 2 weeks ago. And so you want to see how it plays out. Now, is it really useful for people? And is it not a one-time event, but something people use again and again? And we'll see. Is it a business, a leadership, a character book 10, 20 years from now. That's my dream.
All right. We'll come back in 10 years and check in. Sounds
Okay.
good. So I'm going to move on to leadership and advice. So one thing I quickly learned about your leadership and operating style that I've always respected is you always see win-wins. So in your book, there's no zero-sum games. There's always a win-win. From your experience, how rare is this approach, and how much do you ascribe your success to this approach?
Originally, I thought this was how everybody interfaced to other businesses. And it was kind of surprising when I'd go to acquire a company and our business development team, and Rob Savagno's here, and I think Hilton's here, I think I saw him come in. They were very good at it, but I'd always start with the other CEO and say, what's your win here? What do you really want to do? What's the win for your people, et cetera? I do every interview that way. I start with the person doing the interview, and how do we make this your best interview you do this year? What's your win for it? With government leaders, they're kind of hesitant when I first interface to them because I'm talking about how does the country win or what's their win here, but it is powerful. First, it's the right thing to do, but it's surprising how few people think about that. And if you truly make things win-win and you go out of your way to do it, that the shareholders win, the customers win, your partners win, your employees win, you share the success and you share the pain, you get a much more of a commitment, almost a family, if you will, to go after the objectives. However, and I don't think this is getting cynical, but I've been disappointed how few people really approach business that way. I think a lot of people do life and their family and stuff. But in the business world, I think it's dangerous that you need to make it a win-win. It's amazing. You can accomplish so much more in a win-win style than you can a win-lose or I'll win and you just need to figure out how you win type of approach. Very powerful. It's about relationships that go with that.
I'm grateful to you for that approach. I think it's served me very well.
Now, you get to see a lot of people in this valley and beyond. How common or not common do you think it is?
I think it's rare. I think you're unique, and I think a lot of people could stand to learn from you on that one. So now I got to hit you with a hard one because I was going to say that's too nice. That's sappy. We got to.
Thank you. That means the world because you want to get people around you who will tell you what they really believe. Becky, Elaine, Chris, Shannon. But that way you know what you're doing right and what you have to improve on. But it surprised me because it's so basic to what we really value, yet people lose track of that. And it almost always gets them into trouble.
So you've never hesitated to call a trend. I think about voice will be free, even when it is controversial or ahead of its time. You usually let your PR people know, and we appreciate that. Not always, but sometimes, usually. How did you have enough conviction to make bold predictions and stick with your predictions even when you were ahead of your times or in the face of criticism?
My dad taught me that in West Virginia. And once you've seen a state that was on top of the world in chemicals and coal and then fall from grace, once you've seen a Boston 128, which was the Silicon Valley of the world by far, we couldn't even spell Silicon Valley. We were the mini computer area. 1,000 major high-tech companies, you watch them crumble. Once you see the peers that we faced early on in great companies, I mean 3Com, Wellfleet, Synoptics, Cabletron, I can say it now, equally as good of products. But I've learned that if you don't break away and if you don't see the trends and if you make the mistake of selling products rather than selling outcomes, you can get left behind by a very long way. So what I do is I do connect the dots, and part of it's dyslexia because I had to think that way. I can gather data really fast, but I can't go A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I get the data into a format, get a couple points, visualize the outcome, and then go for it. And then you have people like Henry Kissinger and Shimon Peres and Bill Clinton and George Bush reinforce that. So getting the ability to see that and then call the trend. But also if you're trying to lead a company, whether it's a startup, several in this room that I'm very much invested in, committed to, or a big company, the ability to outline to your team where you're going. And if you're not competing on market transitions, you're already getting left behind. If you're not disrupting, you're getting left behind. So call the trend, have the courage of your convictions, but then also have the courage, if you miss, to be able to take a step back and just say, I missed, flip. And I'll still get beat up on Flip. It's not in the top 20 acquisitions we did, Rob, but people will say, well, how did you miss Flip? Well, we got a $2 billion acquisition right that year. We got a $3 billion acquisition right that year. We missed one for $600 million. I told you 1 out of 3 would miss on. I look at them like my dog looks at me when the dog doesn't have any idea what I'm saying. And that will never change. That's part of leadership. So you have to have the courage, but you also want to listen to your critics. There's always an element of truth, almost in most severe critics, even those that way out in left field. And so you always want to listen to that as you go and you learn.
Yeah, I did love my Flip. So now I joked about this, but every time we're at your house, we're eating crickets. The taco seasoned ones are the best. The sea salt are a little stale tasting.
I like sea salt and vinegar.
Yeah. So talk about J2 Ventures a bit. Your portfolio ranges from cricket farming to drone security. Do you have a thread or a theme? And how are you looking at companies and founders?
So there's very much a theme, and if there's only one lesson you take away from the book, I hope that it really resonates with you. And I used to consider process bureaucracy. I've learned that to really move fast with innovation, you've got to have replicatable playbooks that are not based on time, but based on concepts. And so as I really think about where I'm going, I focus entirely on the business opportunities, the business model changes or healthcare model changes or public sector model changes that are enabled by a new transition in technology. So technology, Internet of Things, digitization capability, blurring the physical and virtual world, cybersecurity, voice is the next platform, the ability to all of a sudden transpose any business with speed. So those are the overriding trends. Then I look very frankly for the market transition and the best CEO in that transition. And it's all about leadership. There is no substitute for it. And I'm not sure we deserve this, but we get our pick of the litter anywhere in the world. And so we try to pick the best CEO that fits into the culture I believe is right for the future with the right market transition. There's only one Steve Jobs. He did that remarkably well, but it even took him 7 years to build things without listening to customers. I listen for the customers. What do they say about this company? What are their views on it? And then I try to push myself outside my comfort zone regularly, whether it's as much as trying to become a social media butterfly, and I'd say tremendous improvement, but a long way to go, to the ability to do something that when Mohammed Ashur basically shared with me what he was doing on cricket farming at the Clinton Global Initiative, and he won the top 25,000 startups 3 years before. And he kept saying, John, will you coach me? And I said, yes. Will you invest in me? No way. But after a year of working with him, I suddenly realized that crickets could change world hunger, and they could also become the next lobster. And you could do it with 1/10 the environmental impact. I mean, that's a hoot. I mean, to really change something that dramatically, and then to do what you do well, how do you take a concept like crickets, and how do you make them the lobsters of the future? And you start with the Sejan's restaurant up in San Francisco with a 7-course cricket meal, Michelin 3-star restaurant, unbelievably good, of course with the press there to watch, and you begin to have fun with it and see if you can change. Anybody that's involved in startups would tell you the best portfolios that have the highest return take tremendous risk, and usually 1 or 2 out of 10 make it big. I'm going to try to do the reverse. I'm going to try to have one of the best portfolios, but do it on a much more balance where maybe only 1 out of 3 doesn't make it in terms of the direction. So trying to balance the two, but if it comes back to 2 things, market and transition, both technology and business model, and a world-class CEO in the making who knows what she knows or he knows and knows what they don't and wants a coach.
So let's talk about the CEO a bit.
Okay.
So you're working with a lot of them. Is there anything different about CEOs today versus the past, and what's the biggest mistake your CEO is making?
I think the basic things that are the same. The CEO has to do vision and strategy for the company, develop, recruit, retain, and change the management team, has to do culture, and candidly, the biggest mistake the startups make is they really don't understand how important culture is. It's equally as important to vision and strategy, and then communications. However, the common theme facing the CEOs today, the internet moved at probably 2 to 4 times the speed of traditional business during the 90s, and you had to be at that speed to win. Digitization and what we're about to see with artificial intelligence will be at 3 to 5 times the speed of the internet. So the disruption is going to be huge. So speed of change is going to be something that I think the CEOs have to deal with differently. The communications. Jack Welch will be the first one to say his generation, you didn't have to be good at communications to be a great CEO, and he clearly was. My generation had to be good, and if you were very good, it was an advantage. This generation today has to be very good. And if you're not listening to social media, if you're not understanding the implications of something that just happened on an airplane flight with one of your customers and you're responding in an old world way as opposed to social media is getting lit up about throwing a doctor off the plane, you can get into trouble very quickly. If there's one thing that's most fun with the startups, and the vision and strategy, when you help them figure this out and their pupils dilate, that's really cool. Or when you win a big deal and you're very proud, or you help coach a CEO to take a risk on a couple of their players and it works out well. But the one I enjoy the most is the culture. Because when you share that with people, and at first they don't buy it, and one of my hottest startups, he got vision and strategy right. Boy, he was good at the management team. He probably has 30 of the top 100 artificial intelligence PhDs in the world in his company. And he understood the communications piece, but the culture I didn't think was resonating. And so it's like many things, you kind of chip away at it a little bit at a time. And then all of a sudden he came to me and said, John, I got my business presentation for this week. Will you look at it with my management team? It was the best presentation on culture I've ever seen. He had looked at Netflix, he had looked at Cisco, all the others, but then it was his and he owned. And then he really drove it through, and then we got lucky. He reinforced it within a week without meaning to. He basically had one of his employees lose a member of their family, and he went to her and shared how much he cared. Not only said, take whatever time off you need, but we're going to be there as a family. Here's our thoughts and advice. And he did several other things, much as I'd coached him. And she came back 2 weeks later and she said, I'd worked for 5 companies. This is the first time I've ever felt like management really cared. I mean, that's the reinforcement moment you go, yes. And teaching people cultures is the area that the startups tend to miss. However, the issues I just raised are identical for very large companies today. You've got to be very careful that everyone's going to get disrupted, that if you're out of touch with the market or out of touch with major political trends in your country, the implications can be pretty tough.
Well, hopefully, if you are successful in raising a lot of startups that have that style, it'll be good for all of us. So you've been very vocal about your concerns about the startups in the United States. Are you optimistic that it can change, and what do you see as the outlook for startups?
I'm optimistic, but the odds are 50-50, and that's not good. We tend to think of ourselves as the innovation nation, and here we are in Silicon Valley. And yet we're not in the top 10 in the Bloomberg Index on innovation. We've always been 1 or 2 up toward the top until very recently. And we get excited about the startups because you read about them and the ones that have delayed going public for many, many years. And we think that we're in great shape. We're really not. We've moved from 61% of the world's unicorns to 41% in 4 years. We used to take, if you think of IPOs as the tip of the iceberg for the health of your startup community. In other words, the amount above the water is just a small percentage of what's below, but it's indicative of below. During the 90s, when we generated 22.5 million jobs, 34% GDP growth over 8 years, real per capita income went up 24% per household. We haven't done that since. The numbers now, instead of being 400 to 500 IPOs a year and a peak of 700, we barely are going to get over 200 this year. So you can play this hand out. If digitization, and this is connecting the dots, is going to destroy 20 to 40% of jobs, which digitization and artificial intelligence will, and automation. If we don't only have an engine that is absorbing our young people and our immigrants as they come into our country, but the 20 to 40% of jobs that get destroyed, we have a real social and economic disaster coming our way. And yet nobody seems to be concerned. We're like frogs in a pot, that the temperature's getting heated up more and more. And because they got heated up so slowly, they don't jump out, they get cooked. So I'm very worried about it. I think the odds are only 50-50, and I'm going to try to do my part to help change that. We'll see if we're successful or not.
So if you and Elaine
How
decided...
many people would agree with that? Just so I get a feel. kind of frightening, isn't it?
So if you and Lane decided it was your duty to move back to West Virginia and resuscitate the state, other than opening up new coal mines, what are the 5 things you would do to make West Virginia the next Silicon Valley?
I toyed with the idea, and the reason I'm smiling when you said that, George Bush was kind enough, I can say this now, on a flight on Air Force One, that Lane was with me, to ask him to be in multiple positions in the cabinet. And I've always wondered if I had done that, could I have helped make a difference on it? And Elaine felt that I should, and she said she'd come and visit me in Washington about once a month. And we might have the same discussion on West Virginia, even though we both love it. But if you were outlining what the state needs to do, and this one I have really thought about, and this is even further out than the prediction on France or some of the other things we've talked about, I've become completely convinced it will be a startup economy or small companies getting dramatically bigger is where all job creation and economic health will occur from. If you believe that and they're nowhere near capable of what it is, merely trying to get the cities to do startups, I think unfortunately is going to be very hit and miss with a very low success rate. I think it has to be tied to a university, with the university committed to startups, with their curriculum across engineering and business and med school coming together on how do you do these areas and make a difference. And I'm actually going to try that in West Virginia. And if it works, this could be what people like the Walton families, et cetera, have thought about revitalizing Central and Southeast a part of this country. So I'm not only trying to spread my startups across those, I'm going to take a real run at it in West Virginia. And there's a president there in Gordon Gee who's been at Brown and been at West Virginia and been at Ohio State and now back at West Virginia that has the courage for change. And so we're going to give it a crack, and we're going to put some of our own financial money into it purely as a give back program. And we'll see if it works. So that's what we're going to try. To your point, to go back to where the market was, coal mines of the future will be all digitized. All the equipment, all the heavy earth-moving equipment, the trucks, et cetera, will be run without humans. And the chemical industry will never come back in its prior form. So you've got to go where the market's going. I think it's startups, and we're going to give it a try in West Virginia and maybe around the opioid epidemic that's going on and try to make a difference.
All right, we're behind you. So thinking a bit more globally, you're spending a lot of time in France and India with Macron and Modi specifically. Why'd you pick those 2 countries and leaders, and will they make it?
I think as each of us think about which job to go to or which companies or which countries are going to win, it really comes down to a very simple issue. It's all about leadership. So I bet on leadership every time. I thought actually in Europe, I was pretty sure it was going to be the UK, and I was wrong. And then I went to talk with Chancellor Merkel, and I was wrong again on it. And I realized that France, a socialistic government, go figure, it's kind of like the Democrats getting it here. Little humor for theirs. 2 Republicans in the room, raise your hand, who's the other person? I'm having fun. There is no sacred topic anymore. But a socialistic government, Hollande got it, Prime Minister Valls got it, La Durant, the defense minister, and this young Minister of the Economy by the name of Macron really got it. And the minute I met him, called up Elaine that evening, I said, I just met a future president of France. That was before anybody thought he would ever run, much less win. And so it's about leadership who has the courage to change. Modi, France, 60-some million people, India, 1.3 billion people. Modi is the best thing that, in my opinion, has happened to India since Gandhi. And I think he has the chance to do to the economy what Gandhi did for the future of the state of the country. I know that's controversial to say, and it's not fair to put that much weight on his shoulders, but I think he has a chance to really bring India, not just from an emerging country forward. I think he will be the fastest growing GDP in the world for a decade. And I think his goal of really doing this across 29 states, 7 territories, he cares about it. He does his own vision and strategy, and he's kind enough to include me on a lot of the healthy give and take on it. But once again, enlightened leadership, market transition, technology and business driven, both of them are digitizing their country. So how did I pick them? Leadership, where leadership matched a business or political model change with technology enabled.
So you ran businesses successfully in China and worked in China your whole career. How are you thinking about the current U.S.-China relations?
Your questions haven't got any easier. I want to remind everybody this is me and JC2. We're always not representing any other company. I've been in China for over 35 years. I was with Wang Laboratories. Dr. Wang was Jiang Zemin's prior president of China's classmate. I did the first joint venture ever in China. I got my currency out by getting Zimbabwe tobacco and selling the tobacco for the mini computers, et cetera. And I have a tremendous admiration and love for the Chinese people. The Chinese people have always been very good negotiators, and I admire that, and tough. But during my first 25 years or so interfacing with China, it was always win-win if you, as long as you negotiated firm from your side and looked for the win. In the last 10 years, it's developed into a tremendous win-lose. And that seeps through in the culture, the intellectual property protection, inability of American companies to do business there, but Chinese companies do business here, and a trade imbalance that is almost $370 billion, where it's $500 billion we buy from China, they buy $130 billion from us. And it's growing at 40% a year for decades, but in the last decade and a half, it's gone up almost $300 billion. It's unsustainable. And shame on us for letting the negotiations occur. They got us there. It has to self-correct. It is a win-lose. And in my opinion, we have to step up to that. Now, interestingly enough, when I poll around Silicon Valley, around the country, most business leaders believe that as well. It's hard for me because I do love China, but it has to get back to win-win.
All right, so we're going to move to open Q&A pretty soon. So we're going to have a couple of lightning round for those of you Cisco used to this. What's the most fun thing you've learned in the last year?
How much I could learn from my startups and how fun it was to maintain control of your own destiny.
Yeah. What are you doing now that you never thought you'd be doing?
Trying to change the world one more time. I thought startups
Your
would
own
be
email?
fun. Pardon me?
Your own email?
Yeah, I actually am. I got your email, your printouts. I think you could have netted it out a little bit tighter on it. But that was just a little bit of humor back and forth. I do the majority of my social media, majority of my own email. But Shannon plays a huge role in that. She is my operational lead. My son is the revenue generation and the technology lead. But I actually like that. After first being kind of terrified because I was taught never put anything in writing for legal reasons, now you own it, and I like it.
Yeah.
99% of the time.
You're clearly enjoying it because every text ends with, and I'm funnier than ever was, aren't I?
Yes, I asked that question because I'm insecure, just verifying, am I getting funnier?
Yeah, every time.
And your answer would be?
Every time. Funnier than the last, every time. When we sit down in 5 years, what will we be talking about?
I think we'll be talking about, did this nation put a person on the moon again and become the leader in innovation and startups? And it won't be done in 5 years, but we're going to know if we have it or not. I hope that's the topic. It will be the topic either way, because if we don't, the topic will be what's happening to income in America, how's that changing voting patterns, how's it change the future to where most Americans, Silicon Valley is an exception, most Americans don't believe their children will have as good a life as the parents or their children a better life. We have to fix that. I think the second thing, we'll still be talking about tremendous speed of this digitization and AI enabled. And how do we as society make that transformation both in jobs, but how do you funnel it into tech for good as opposed to tech for challenges?
Great. All right, so let's open it up for questions from the audience. So there's folks with mics, and there's a question.
So just hold up your hand and they'll run mics to you on that.
Bonus drinks for the hardest questions.
Now, I always worry when the first question comes from the back of the room. And this hasn't changed. Over the years, for those in communications, you walk up to the person in the back of the room, you maintain eye contact. It's so hard for them to ask you a really zinger when you get very close. How am I doing so far?
And I have a personal plea.
Okay.
Why haven't you run for president? I truly, truly mean that. Think about the experience you have, think about the global focus, and think about the win-win attitude. How many people in the United States have that?
Thank you. It means the world to me. It's one, however, you've got to understand what you enjoy in life. I like to move fast. I actually like Democrats and Republicans. I'm not perfect. Elaine can tell you I make mistakes. Not too many, hopefully. But I believe in just doing the right thing, not voting on party lines, but just what's right, period. And I expect teamwork. I love constructive friction, as you know, Mel. And I will institute that if there isn't any. But in the end, we've got to be on the same team and move forward. And so as you think about that and combining with speed, it's just a hard environment to be in. And I am in love with what I'm doing now. I mean, I hope it shows. I am having more fun than a kid in the candy store with both my grandkids by family and my grandkids in terms of the startups. And I think I can really make a difference there. Your question's a fair one, because I worry that many leaders in this country, not just recently, but over the last decade or two, shy away from politics because it's a tough field. And it's one where many challenges can occur.
I'm going to add on to that and say what I really meant was, why didn't you put Elaine in as First Lady?
Well, that would be the best decision I've ever made. Thank you. It means the world to me. Very kind.
All right, looks like next question?
Hello, John.
Yes.
How are you doing?
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Hi.
Thank you so much for such an enlightening conversation. Your book is really good. I have two questions from the book. In the book, you mentioned that one of your friends, he says that you cannot judge a startup or a leader unless and until they get a near-death experience.
Yes.
Yes, so who is that friend?
Jack Welch. And he told me that in the mid to late 90s, probably about 97. And we were on a roll, and we knew we had a good chance of becoming the most valuable company. And while we weren't cocky, we were confident. And he said, "You got a good company." And I said, "Jack, I'll bite. What's it take to have a great company?" And it's a near-death experience. I didn't grasp it at that time, but I understood it in 2001 in a big way. And until you go through that as a leadership team and others, you never have a great company. And it's so interesting how companies who go through that get knocked on their tail and never get back up. Jack Welch called me at the end of 2001. He said, "John, this is your best leadership year ever, and you now have a great company." I said, "Jack, it doesn't feel like it. My own team has doubts about my leadership. Some people are questioning, should I run Cisco? The stock's down tremendously." He said, "No, this was your best year." I said, "You'll be the only one that ever says that." And he said, "You're probably right." And he was. But it's how you lead through adversity is what real leadership's about, not just how you lead during the good times. Leading during the good times isn't that tough. It's more, don't screw something up. And then having the courage to really change dramatically during the good times, that's leadership.
Question. Mentioned about Shimon Peres.
Yes.
At the age of 88, he was jogging near your house, and he wanted to ride your electric car. And you said it in a very humorous way in the book. Can you recreate the scene for us?
Yeah, he wasn't jogging, but the Israeli security was nights before, and our hills were lit up like a scene from E.T. with cameras and everything. Elaine and I wondered what was going on, and we realized it was, as Chris Plummer would tell you, 6 different security groups coordinating what they would do, because at this time Israel was thinking very seriously about bombing Iran to stop their nuclear development. So it was a tense evening, and we had snipers all over the place, and Shimon came in, and within 5 minutes he had everybody literally amazed with his brilliance. We were all taking out notes, and we had a bunch of startups and VCs. David Handler was there and others, and he grasped what could change so well. And his security team said, "All right, John, we're going to put him in the safest seat, so if a sniper shoots, it's most likely to be able to come in his direction, but you must keep him in the 3 rooms on top." And they said, "If you don't follow that, we're going to be very disappointed." And so I said, "Okay." And so Shimon said, John, I understand you got an electric car. And I said, yes, Mr. President, we do. He said, can I go see it? I said, Mr. President, your security force said I could not take you off this floor. He said, John, I'm the president. I said, let's go. And as we're going down in the elevator, one of his security guys came up and said, John, first, we are not prepared for if he starts driving the car, how we get cars in front of him and behind him. Secondly, he hasn't had a driver's license for decades. But what did it show? It showed an individual curiosity, an individual who really wanted to change things, somebody who thought like a teenager, who behaved like a teenager, who challenged me. And each time we were together, he pushed me outside of my comfort zone, Elaine, as you know, again and again. Probably one of the nicest people I've ever seen. And if you watch how many times he reinvented himself, I think he's the model of the future. So if there's one leader that I have to say out of all I met that was the most consistent, creative, out-of-box thinking type person, it would be Shimon.
Good evening, John.
Hey, Mike.
They asked me to say I'm Ron from Cisco.
Okay.
Let's all give Mel a round of applause. What a great job she's doing.
Yeah.
I once worked for a wise CEO who told me that you learn the most about people under pressure.
Yes.
And so I wonder if you could tell us two things. One is, what is it that CEOs have that helps them perform under pressure that we can all learn from? And second, what did you do in West Virginia that day that brought you back under pressure, from pressure to being calm?
Okay. CEOs who handle the pressure well don't just do it as a transaction. How did I do in this performance? But they do it as how did you change the performance and how did you maximize the opportunity and minimize the damages that go with it. So CEOs who do that well, this goes back to the playbook. First is be realistic how much is self-inflicted and how much of it was market-inflicted. If your strategy was working well, as ours was in 2001, and you were a part of that, then you don't dramatically change your strategy. You just have to realign your resources for the opportunity. If it was largely your own operations, and I've spread Cisco too thin at times, and I have no regrets on that. That's part of leadership. But if it was because I had to spread too thin, you have to correct that and address what caused it. The second thing is when you make the changes, you have to assume they're going to be deeper and last longer than you think. And so the second mistake CEOs make, or good ones don't make the mistake of, is they adjust deeper than they think they need and prepare for a longer time period. And unfortunately, that's usually required. The third thing that happens is CEOs either can be on the very leading edge and out in front of their employees, their customers, their partners, their shareholders, and the media, and you're going to get the tar beat out of you when that occurs. Or you can withdraw. And I think CEOs, this goes back to communications, who handle these setbacks well are out there very visibly taking ownership, no nonsense, not saying one thing and behaving a different way, because the market senses that over time. But I cannot go back to the end result. It's about how you picture where you want to be, how are you going to get there, give people an idea for the time, and that's where leadership is lonely. But boy, you set the pace, and you got to be like the lead dog in the dog sled. If you go too fast, your team breaks down. If you go too slow yourself, the company breaks down. And so it's kind of striking the balance between that. On West Virginia, to this day, it still hurts. I'm not sure I'm really over it. It really hurt, and because of the family implications on it. I dealt with the world the way it was, and boy, I got my battle armor on. And I've not been angry very many times in life, but I was angry at how the impact of my mom, especially. But I never show it. You've never seen me raise my voice in a number of years. You see me do a pretty good duck call, which I'll instruct the audience on later. But it was one I just had to deal with that. The disappointment of my own paper, my own hometown doing it, it really hurt. On the other hand, Elaine and I both are in agreement. To hold grudges doesn't do any good. And you go back and part of it, maybe I could have handled better in terms of sensing this problem was going to occur and prevented the article from ever being written ahead of time. But I tend to try to do to the best of my ability just the right thing. And I will make mistakes, and I've said it multiple times. Let me say it again. I'm far from perfect. And I try to just say, how do you deal with it yourself? But it's what my dad and mom taught me. Mom taught me the emotional IQ. Dad taught me the vision and strategy. He said, you got 20 minutes? I knew I had 20 minutes. And it might have been one of my best presentations ever. Mel knows that I'm best when I'm emotional and under stress. There's a chance you could crash and burn then, which is why you don't want to do it very often. But I connect better when I'm in the emotional state and make the contact and feed off your energy.
Hi, my name is Sarah Prosta. Thank you for coming tonight. My question is, there something in your childhood experiences, maybe teams or something that you might draw upon on tough challenges in your business life, things that kind of taught you essentials of how you operate today? And are there specific techniques or things you do to, see your blind spots?
Probably break it into 3 questions. One of them is not about teens, but when I had dyslexia as a young person, and my parents thought I could go to college and they'd work with me each night about reading, it didn't help. All they were teaching me was groove the swing the wrong way. And Mrs. Anderson got me through that, and I've learned how, for the first time in my life, take a weakness and make it a strength. Because I was laughed at in class when I read, I never teased other people except when I love them. And the good news is, Chris, I got a lot of love for you, buddy, and I love giving you a hard time. And I'm glad you finally got commitment and got married. Separate story. The second part is that as I began to become a teenager, I realized what I really loved doing was building teams. And when I thought I was going to marry Elaine the first time, and she turned me down kind of, and we dated off and on for about 5 years up after that at West Virginia. The fraternity I was a part of didn't exist at West Virginia, so we formed our own intramural teams. And we had 6 football teams, 7 basketball teams, 2 badminton teams, et cetera. And we contended for every position. So I realized first how much I love competition, but even more, I love building teams that can compete. I think that served me very well. And it also taught me it's all about talent, but only talent that can really play together as a team, that can really make a difference. I'd say those 2 things that come to mind.
Hi, John. I'm
Hi.
Larry. I used to work at Cisco. It was pretty darn good, so thanks for that.
Thank you, Larry.
So first thing,
I can recognize the voice. I can't see any faces. It's dark out
Okay.
there. But some of your voices are like mine. I can distinguish them.
there we go. First of all, I've had crickets. They were delicious. Everybody should try them. So
All right.
there we go.
Your kids will love them.
So, and then when we were visiting a little earlier, I addressed something you don't necessarily go on about, but you're a very strong patriot, right? And here I'm going to challenge you a little bit, right? Because when we were talking about China, or when you were talking about China earlier, you painted it in a way of that, they're hard negotiators and they're taking advantage. But now I'm running a startup, and it's a hardware company, and it's infrastructure. And I got to tell you, every week I got a lot of American investors going, that sounds hard, that sounds like it's going to take a long time. And every week I get unsolicited invitations from Chinese investors to put money into the company. Okay, so is it just that they're tough negotiators, or are we losing some of our courage to go do those hard things that are a little bit more daring? Because that's what I worry about when I'm dealing with this day in, day out. Do I get the drink for a tough question?
That's a good one.
Okay.
No, actually, it's a really thoughtful one. It is tough, but I think it's one we've got to come to grips with as a country. I'll break it into a couple pieces. Yeah, the Chinese are tough negotiators. Something that may surprise you, I've never had a Chinese leader, politically or business, that I formed a relationship ever break their word to me. Now, make no mistake, Huawei copied our intellectual property. We held them accountable. And then I went over and met Ren Jinfei and said it must never happen again. But that's tough negotiations. And it's having a different view of how things should be done, and then explaining to the other side, if you do that, there'll be a price to be paid. I do think we got out negotiated over a series of years, but the real downfall has happened in the last 15 years. I mean, 40% compounded growth and the trade deficit problems to the point where it's completely unfair. That was a win-lose. And I shared with China, I've never told anybody this in this group, Terry Anderson will remember it, is at the World Economic Forum many years ago, I'd probably have to go back maybe 12 years, 10 years, I said to the Chinese leadership, it was the second time they came, it's developing to win-lose on both security cyber and other issues, and if you don't change it, there's going to be a major breakage at some time between our countries, and that's not either side's best interest. Then I held my breath to see if they were going to throw us out of China, and they didn't, to their credit, on it. To the third part of the question, I think the Chinese understand that you've got to be good in hardware, firmware, and software. And I think at the present time, America's overcorrected, especially on the investment side and the patient sides, to software, quicker return, higher margins. But the best products are often hardware with custom ASICs with software designed into them. And we're announcing tomorrow with Bravero the most secure phone in the world, maybe the only one that is nation-state proof, at least appears to be. And it's hardware based, and you know from security, software can be broken the easiest, firmware second, hardware last, but if you do the combination, it's the difference. I think, Larry, it's very important, and I don't see the VCs wanting to go into what I would call infrastructure with large software components. And I think it's a mistake, both in terms of investment, but it leaves the market open to our global competitors. I think when we don't do that, we get into trouble. And let me just use one example of where we looked at the solar energy and wind energy and then the fuel cell energy, and we gave up the first two. And as a country, you can't be self-sufficient on energy unless you're leading in new technologies. I'd argue the exact same thing for the infrastructure and who wins on 5G and the elements with it for it. If I can ever maybe open some doors for you on that, but I also talk to the VCs. Most of them don't have the appetite that they used to for this area. Mm-hmm.
Do we have any more questions?
Hey, John, I'm Subhav, and I've worked at Cisco for around 9+ years.
Okay.
So I'm really proud of the culture that you've built there, and thank you so much for treating everyone as your extended family. The question I have is, you said in your book that leaders are basically a product of the setbacks that they face. What advice do you have for next generation leaders to take on companies and really become successful? And the second question I have is, in your book, you said you've ridden the Black Hawk, so the helicopter at King Abdullah's military equipment.
Yes, I did. That was an experience. Chris was with me on that. He just figured if I was going to die, he was going to die with me, so nobody's second guessing. So in sequence, taking risk again, I would do it in a second. And Elaine knows that's part of my personality, and she balances me. But I am a risk taker in terms of I absolutely would take the next generation of risk. I fully intend to with these startups, even at a faster and more aggressive pace than we did at Cisco. On leadership and capabilities, I cannot overemphasize how important it is to have an effective immigration policy. 40% of the Fortune 500s were founded by immigrants or their children. Out of the startups that I look at, that number is way over 50%. And we've got to continue to be the location the best and brightest both want to come to, and that we encourage to start businesses for us, which generates jobs for all Americans. So I think now's the time to take a crack at that again after this November election, because if we can get one thing for the Democrats and Republicans to agree upon, it should be small business and job creation. That's hard to argue against. And I've talked to both Leader Pelosi and to Kevin McCarthy and Paul Ryan, and same thing with Chuck Schumer, and same thing with the Republican leadership in the Senate. This could be perhaps something we could bring together. And wouldn't it be nice for our country to work together on one major issue? And guess what? When you do it once and you're successful, people try it again, don't they? That would be fun.
Great. There's one question in the back.
Thank you. Hi, John. Catherine Howe from Cisco.
Hey, Catherine.
Thank you for a great discussion. I'm going to ask you to connect a couple dots. You mentioned both of these dots. One
Okay.
was our underachievement in Silicon Valley in terms of startups, and, unicorns, et cetera.
Uh-huh.
The other dot you mentioned even more briefly was the opioid crisis.
Yes.
And it is deteriorating our competitiveness.
Yes, it is.
And our human fabric. And I know you have a point of view on this. Why are we not deep in the digitization solution for this crisis, and how can we get there?
I think whenever you tackle something that isn't impossible, but extremely challenging and difficult to solve, you have to have the guts and you've got to have the country believing that you need to address it and willing to do the hard lifting to make it happen. I actually think the two are unfortunately very tightly tied together, that a lot of the opioid crisis has occurred in parts of the country where there's a lot of despair, where people who were able to make a good job in manual labor no longer can and are not optimistic about their future for their children. And I think under the right scenario, if our country would come together and say, let's become the startup nation, but let's make it inclusive of everybody. And if the companies who have done so well out here in Silicon Valley would say, let me give back just a couple $100 million per company to doing these startups with the universities, think what a difference that could make. So I do think it's manageable. You've got to get some successes, and then the Valley's going to step up to this one again. If you think about it, for those of you who watched for 2 decades, from 1990 to 2010, we had no issues in Washington, no issues in Russia, no issues, major ones in China, because we dealt with them in a way that could be a win-win and also wouldn't do certain things. And we focused on giving back, whether it's the network academies or social good around the world and job creation and training, as much as we thought about economic health of our company. I believe Silicon Valley still is the most innovative spot in the world. I think to see these companies come together and say, let's get back to tech for good could be a tremendous opportunity in terms of the direction. But assuming that doesn't happen, which I think the odds are less than 50-50 it will, then how does a different segment of the group get startups going again? How do we come together with political leaders, both Democrats and Republicans, say, let's try this in key states? And remember that as a parent, when your child joins a startup, the odds of failure are 70%. And so realize that's part of the culture that they're entering into. I think it's a very good one to be a part of. But I do think in the end, it's about those two could be solved through a common denominator. And we're going to try a small segment of that in West Virginia.
Great. Is there another question? Great.
John, this is center of the room. I came tonight to thank you and celebrate being with you. And I thank you because today I'm an entrepreneur and I have a company which is 4,000 odd people, and a lot of it's to the experience that I had with Cisco, some of the life near-death experience. Unfortunately, Becky was at the receiving end of it, but it was a I came out of it unscathed. But when I came out of it, I said, if I can do that, and if I can build on the dreams and win-win, then I will, hopefully. So I left a secure job and then I built an entrepreneur, which has turned out to be a good story. So thank you for that. A lot of motivation there. But my question to you is, everybody in this room is privileged. I mean, we are all privileged beyond our dreams as we can imagine, right? You talked about multiple problems today, but one of the good things that you talked about, which probably is among the top 2 or 3 problems, is how US is losing its competitiveness, both from an innovation perspective, given the changes in technology of whether it's artificial intelligence, automation, et cetera. And if we don't change it, as you rightly pointed out to Mel, that in 5 years' time, we'll have a difficult conversations, one way or the other, either a good or a bad conversation.
Yes.
How should each of us make a difference? I mean, it's one thing to come here for dinner, have a nice thing. Thank you for the meal, by the way. And we come here and have this thing and we go away. But, how should we go back and contribute, being in the privileged positions and being where we are? How do we give back?
It's a great question to end on. I think that's our last question.
And Mel knows me well because I always want to end on a question that can kind of summarize the evening's activity. I think we are very candidly in a privileged position that is unique in the whole world. First, in terms of economic opportunities for the people in this room, but secondly, at the very heart of innovation. And so being in that position is something that I believe we owe an obligation to give back on. Each of us in this room can make your decision, yes or no on that. The second is I'm worried that we're quitting dreaming as a valley. And we are, to the point Larry made, focused on incremental improvements and doing the right thing, I would argue, for too long, and shying away from some of the areas that has a much higher risk with maybe not quite as much upside, but if we don't address it, we could have a real problem. Areas around infrastructure, 5G, some of the implications on energy, et cetera. So I would kind of close with the walkaway. If there was only one chapter that I liked the best in the book, it was have the courage to dream and be bold. And as you do that, don't just dream and be bold. Write your press release before you start to do, whether it's what you're going to do with your own group, what you're going to do with your own company, what you're going to encourage your political leaders, regardless of party, to do, and how the outcome is going to come about, and what are the 4 to 5 things that really move it. And then have the courage to go for it. And I think we need to become a startup nation again, but even in Silicon Valley, that's slowing. We need to get the Valley going again and get the consistency. And so when you have a chance to help somebody else, reach out and share with them the experience, which I think we're all very blessed to have. I hope you found the evening entertaining, that if you came away with one point that might help you change your views about what you want to do in life or the risk you're going to take or how you deal with adversity, then it's been very much worthwhile for Mel and I. Elaine, I want to thank you for being my partner through all those times. Mel, it just is a joy to work with you again. I'm going to steal you at the right time. I just got to figure out how. And Joel, your husband, already said that could be negotiated.
I'm getting more expensive all the time.
That's all right. You're worth it. Is that fair, Joel?
He's gone. He had to go to the airport. He went to the airport.
He's not? Okay. Yeah. So, Mel, thank you. And as you can tell, I think when you build a relationship for life, you want to have fun. You want to kid about it, Kelly. You want to kid about it, Tay. You want to say, Phyllis, what can we do to really change things? Marilyn, the same thing. And build a family. And as a family, there's almost nothing you can't do with the right talent and common goal. So thank you for sharing views tonight. Mel can decide you're amazing at what you do. And I'm very blessed to have you as one of my great friends.
Mel and John, thank you so much for sharing this great conversation with us. I think they've given us a lot to think about, and everybody in the room enjoyed it a lot. A copy of the video recording will be made available on our YouTube channel shortly, so I hope that you will share that link with people who were unable to join us this evening. As a token of our appreciation for both of you, we have the speaker T-shirt of the Churchill Club.
Oh. All right.
Hope you wear that in very good health. Our next program is Thursday at Ford Greenfield Labs, where we talk about microgrids. Don't forget to pick up your book on the way out tonight, and please join us for a dessert reception now following the program. Thank you. You've been a wonderful audience. Good night.